And today I will give an overview of the regulatory challenges and opportunities in the EU legal and policy framework. So I will start with the roadmap for the presentation. I will give an introduction on the project where my research is framed, and I will introduce you the legal research that I'm conducting and the latest developments in terms of policy and legislation. I will move on to the main bottlenecks, what we have identified as bottlenecks, also with the help of stakeholders, and potential opportunities, and then there will be time for questions. Let's start with the introduction of the project. So it's called the BASTA project, and it's basically the partners are Hasselt University and the CMK, the Center for Environmental Sciences, and ILVO, which is the Flanders Research Institute for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. The legal research is part of a work package that is handled by Hasselt University. I am the person who's doing the research and under the supervision of Professor Bernard van Heusen, which was my supervisor. Where are we located? For those of you who don't know much about European geography, we are basically there, more or less, and in Belgium, and in basically at the heart of Europe, near Brussels. And what are we doing? This is so the BASTA project is it's an acronym for Biochar's Added Value in Sustainable Land Use with Targeted Applications in Processes, Growing Media, and Future-Proof Open Field Cultivation. The overall aim of the project is to gain knowledge on input materials and production parameters, both affecting biochar characteristics, and then basically further addressing also sustainable applications with market potential. And there are several work packages, 5 research work packages and 2 output work packages. The deliverables are the ones that you can see. We have different work packages: biochar production, manure and biomass processing, biochar and growing media, biochar and open field cultivation, and then an integrated assessment where my research is located, as you can see right down at the bottom. And the output, the final output of the project is a user-friendly policy and business support tool to assist stakeholders to make intelligent matches between input materials, production parameters, and biochar application, with an eye on the economical analysis and the legal analysis as well. And the project context, if you want more on the project, which because I'm not equipped to answer questions on the other work packages, of course, these are the context: the website, the promoter, the co-promoter, and the project manager. Moving on to the legal research. So giving you the scope of the research and the end goals. So we all know that biochar has a lot of potential uses, as you can see here: agriculture, animal farming, soil remediation, negative emission technology, and high-end applications. And it has also potential risks basically to the environment, to human and animal health, depending on the uses, of course, that you make of biochar, and also societal. For example, the competition for land and food production if you use virgin materials for production of biochar. Uses, so the characteristic of biochar itself, the uses and the potential risk all give us an indication of where we need to look at legislation-wise. And so then we have a research focus based on those inputs, and it's twofold. We will analyze the EU law and policy and case law and the Belgian situation. So starting from EU law, fertilizers, of course, the legislation on fertilizers, waste legislation, chemicals legislation, climate and emission, energy and renewables, agriculture, food, animal health legislation, water quality, air quality legislation, biodiversity legislation, and GMOs. I won't be able to look at all those, especially because the BASTA project has a very specific frame, but I will touch upon the ones that are not the focus of the project itself. What about soil protection? Well, soil protection is something that is not at the moment regulated at EU level, so it will remain basically matter for national competence. As far as the research about Belgium and Flanders is concerned, we would need to be mindful of the division of competences between EU and Belgium, and between the federal level and the regional level within the state of Belgium, as you can see here from the interconnections between the various levels. An example that I won't be, but just put it there, but I won't go into it, is the fertilizers legislation, both at the EU level and the national level. That gives an example of the division of competences. If we look at the Belgian level, then we need to be focusing on the implementation of EU level, and so the areas that I previously mentioned are also valid. Or we need to look at the exclusive competences, which are not the same as before, and there are additional law fields to include, for example, urban planning law, tax law, and soil protection for now, because it's a matter of national competence. The end goal of the research is basically providing an overarching legal analysis on biochar with main focus on BASA uses, so it basically used in processes, in growing media, and in open field. There will be policy recommendations, and I will give my contribution to the support tool, of course, and along the value chain, so for the entire value chain. Moving on to the latest developments in policy and legislation, let's start with the European Green Deal, of course. We all basically, I hope everybody, possibly everybody knows about the European Green Deal, whose goal is transforming the EU economy for a sustainable future, with efforts on different fronts: climate, clean energy, industry, pollution, biodiversity preservation, environmentally friendly food system, and mainstreaming sustainability. From the European Green Deal, we have different policy instruments that have been published. One of them is the Circular Economy Action Plan, which has a few actions that are interesting for biochar. For example, the review of the Industrial Emission Directive and the best available technique documents. The carbon farming, action on carbon farming, meaning that the Commission has announced that it will develop a regulatory framework for certifying carbon removals based on an carbon accounting mechanism to monitor and verify the authenticity of carbon removals. And this will be done around 2023, so a few years from now. And then the EU carbon market, the EU market for secondary raw materials, and implementation of bioeconomy action plan, which is that one, which is based on well, 3 pillars: strengthening and scaling up of bio-based sectors, deployment of local bioeconomies, and the ecological understanding the ecological limits of the bioeconomy. As far as the farm to fork strategy is concerned, again, we have several actions that are interesting for biochar, for the potential uses of biochar. I'm not going to go into it. And then we have the biodiversity strategy, again, several actions that are relevant for biochar, as you can see there. And these two, biodiversity strategy and farm to fork strategy, also mention the organics action plan, which was published a few days ago. For whoever's interested. And then we have other interesting documents like the industrial strategy, which is linked to the circular economy action plan, the chemical strategy towards toxic-free environment, and the strategy on sustainable finance. As far as the relevant legislative developments, we have 2. I'm talking about now developments that are specific to biochar. So biochar will enter the legislation. So we have the EU Fertilizing Product Regulation, which is basically pertaining to EU fertilizing products. So only those fertilizers which will have the CE mark. The N will be also basically accessing the single market, so EU-wide fertilizers. The application will be from the 16th of July 2022. And the Fertilizing Product Regulation was meant to expand the scope of the EU legislation on fertilizing products to secondary raw materials. So basically to give some more life to the recovered and bio-based fertilizing products. So that was the idea behind the new regulation. The key elements of this are basically the opening of the single market for bio-based fertilizers, basically introducing new and innovative organic fertilizers by defining conditions under which these can access the EU single market, rules on safety and quality, providing thus strict rules on safety, quality, and labeling requirements for all fertilizers to be traded freely across the EU. So the producer will need to demonstrate that the products meet those requirements before giving the CE mark. And then the EU fertilizing products will be divided into different product function categories, meaning that so different product functions, for example, liming, a function of liming, or so soil amendment, or fertilizing function, they warrant different product safety and quality requirements because of the different use, and that basically match their intended uses. So the EU fertilizing products should therefore be divided into different product function categories, which should each be subjected to specific safety and quality requirements. And then we have the component materials for EU fertilizing products that are also categorized. And here, basically, the EU fertilizing products, this means that an EU fertilizing product should only consist of those component materials complying with the requirements for one or more of the component material categories listed in the annex. And these materials are also subjected to specific process requirements and control mechanism. And then finally, the regulation also introduces new limit values for contaminants in fertilizers. Why is this relevant for biochar? Because the Article 42.2 obliges the Commission to assess dubious materials and to adopt delegated acts to include those materials in Annex 2 if the criteria pertaining to scientific evidence are met. The Commission has done this assessment through the research center of the Commission and is now working on a delegated act. So an act to include those products into the annex of the EU Fertilizing Product Regulation. And the key elements of this provisional draft act, which is, so it's not law yet, but it's coming. And for now, I can say that, so the scope are pyrolysis and gasification materials obtained through the thermochemical conversion under oxygen limiting conditions of exclusively one or more of the listed input materials. And then it goes on as in defining the list of approved materials and waste sources and streams, and the processing requirements and the chemical characteristic and limits. Further also, they need to be met also with the product function categories limits and characteristics. And then there's also the REACH compliance for registration that is also included. And then it goes on to extend the labeling requirements and the rules on quality assurance for the production process for those materials as well. The second piece of legislation that I wanted to talk to you about today is the organics, a new organics regulation. They will apply from January 2022. And the subject matter is basically, well, organic farming. So principles of organic production and rules concerning organic production, related certification and use of indications referring to organic production in labeling and advertising, as well as rules on control. For example, there will be a restricted list of approved fertilizers and pesticides and biocides, which is thus relevant for biochar. And so the current legislation was outdated, so that was the reason why we have a new one now. It gave rise to requests for interpretation. There were many derogation discrepancies, so it was time to have a new one. What is the relevance for biochar? Well, so we have a few key elements which I'm not going to discuss, but it will harmonize, simplified, and clarified the framework for organics. And for biochar, this is relevant because the Commission is working now on an implementing act, which is expected in July, August, on the authorization of products and substances that may be used in organic production as per Article 24. Biochar is expected to be on this list, which would be similar to the current one. So we have the current regulation that also has an implementing act on which biochar is listed. And this will be basically maintained in the new one. Moving on to the main bottlenecks that we have identified. So starting with the Industrial Emission Directive, we have, so this is the main EU instrument regulating pollutant emission from industrial installations and covers several sectors. And there's also important is that all installations covered by the directive must prevent and reduce pollution by applying the best available techniques. And there's also the regulation of permits. And it's currently under revision, so that's also interesting to know. And why is it relevant for biochar? Because pyrolysis is basically regarded as incineration. It's more of a mean to incinerate waste rather than a mean to recover materials for now. This is what stakeholders have highlighted. This is important because, the combustion plants, waste incineration plants, and waste co-incineration plants, they have specific rules they have to abide to. So this is one of the bottlenecks that has been identified. The second one was the waste legislation. We have the Waste Framework Directive, which is establishing a framework, legal framework for treating waste in the EU. And basically what it does is it defines what waste is and what is not waste, and lays down corresponding obligations for waste, for example, transport of waste, and draws also a general framework for so on how to deal with waste, for example, the waste hierarchy, the separate collection, and the permitting of treatment plants. So this is relevant because we don't know exactly what biochar is from a legal standpoint. We don't know if it's waste or if it's a byproduct, or if it can be covered under end of waste status. Byproducts are substances or objects resulting from a production process, the primary aim of which is not the production of that substance or object. So they're basically, what the word says, byproducts. And end of waste, the end of waste status is a status of a waste which has undergone a recycling or other recovery operation, and is basically considered to have ceased to be waste. So it's not waste anymore. Member states have to take appropriate measures to ensure that these products, they're not waste anymore. So that is something that is interesting to know. And the Commission can also lay down criteria for both byproducts and end of waste. So the idea behind this concept is basically to allow for materials that can be further used to re-enter the economy. And to this effect, the new draft act on fertilizers might help to clarify a little bit the matter that we're looking into. The third bottleneck regards the REACH regulation. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. It provides a comprehensive legislative framework for chemicals and applies to all chemical substances. And it basically gives a lot of, bears with it a lot of obligations for companies, and it entails an administrative burdens for companies. And biochar is basically subjected to the REACH regulation. So what this means is has to be, there has to be a dossier that needs to open and it needs to be approved, basically. So for now, as far as I'm aware, there's biochar from wood can be treated under the charcoal dossier, because the wood and charcoal have a lot of there's a lot of corresponding characteristics, but this is only valid for some kinds of biochar. So it's not a solution really. So what we're looking into is to possibly foresee an exemption, like it's, for instance, the case for compost and digestate. And then other bottlenecks are the legislation on GMOs in case of GM biomass, which is not really the focus of basically the research I'm doing, because we basically treat waste more. It's more related to waste materials, what we're doing with the BASTA project, but this is also a possible bottleneck. And then permits, of course, which is always something that any industrial installation needs to deal with. As far as the opportunities are concerned, but I'll give an overview of this. So we have the Common Agricultural Policy that is currently under interinstitutional negotiations. And there are a few things that I'm not a fan of the Common Agricultural Policy as it is proposed now, but it has some things that can be useful for biochar, for example, so the eco schemes. I'm not going to go into this because I don't have time, but this is something that we need to keep an eye on. And then we have the energy and climate legislation. We are looking into the possibility of, seeing if it's possible to include biochar in biochar project under the ETS system, which is the emission trading system in the EU, the EU carbon market, basically. And then the renewables legislation, especially when there's a co-production of biofuels. And so here what matters is it's important that projects that use sustainable biomass, so accent on sustainable here, are promoted in a balanced way vis-a-vis other renewables, for example, solar technologies, and the subsidies are not skewed towards energy production within the sustainable biomass, that subsidies are not skewed towards energy production, because that would hurt biochar in the long run, we believe. And then there's the new climate law, which is also under interinstitutional negotiation. So a lot of things are happening. It's a very exciting time. And then also these pieces of legislation are also under revision. And I'm talking about the Renewable Energy Directive, the Emission Trading System Directive, and the LULUCF regulation, which is land use change, and forestry. And the forest strategy is also coming up. I think within this year we should have the document. Some more opportunities, I believe, can be provided from support and funding mechanisms, for example, the Innovation Fund. And I think also the recovery funding can be a very good opportunity, because the 37% has been earmarked for climate investment and reform. Although I have to say, I have heard that the national recovery plans are not that they're not as ambitious as I would like, but there's the 30% earmarking, so we'll see what comes out of it. And then we have sustainable finance, of course, and investments, and we have a new regulation on this, the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy Regulation at the EU level, and the Commission is working on an act to define what is a sustainable investment. And I think the act should come in, I guess, a few days or a week or so, within April. I'm not sure, but it should come soon in any case. And then we have the possible taxation mechanisms, for example, CO2 tax, that might also be useful for biochar and bioenergy in any case, and also parallelly also the discouragement of environmentally harmful things like the subsidies to fossil fuels, for example, which is not taxation, but it's something that I also have in mind. Public procurement, given that states are consumers as well. This is also an area that I think should be also looked at. And then state aid, which is also another thing that is interesting, not my area of expertise, but it's something that I think can provide some interesting things. And now it's question time. I think I'm perfectly on time. Okay, thank you. And do you have any questions?
Thank you, Elisa, for your presentation. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, I know, sorry, but...
And I guess a lot of new information for some of us. So you got some questions. The first one was from John Hoffmeyer, and he was asking about, if I understood correctly, legislators view pyrolysis as incineration. If that's correct, are the researchers challenging that view?
Wait, I don't. Can I see? Can I see the question?
Yeah, open the chat on the bottom.
Yeah, I have to stop sharing the screen. The screen sharing. Okay. Where is it?
At 3:22.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what the stakeholders have reported. The idea is that because since now I think pyrolysis, yeah, there's been not a lot of yeah, it's a new thing. So you know, legislation always a bit follows progresses in sciences, and I think that it's interesting to look at it as a way to recover materials rather than a way to dispose of materials. And I think the legislation should reflect that. Um, I don't know if the researchers in general are challenging the view. I cannot answer that question because this is what I'm working on, but I haven't heard of. I know that my colleagues are also the ones who work in science, so in the hard sciences are also well, this is a bottleneck. So and yeah, so it has been identified as such. So that's what I'm also looking into. I don't know if that answers any.
Maybe a follow-up question. So did I understand that right? The pyrolysis units are now regulated by the according to industrial incineration plant standards.
So there's a definition of incineration plants that involves basically the use of the materials that result from the incineration as to incinerate them as well. So I think that gives us some room for maneuver. But it's a work in progress. I'm working on this. So this is my exactly. I cannot draw conclusions for the moment, but it's something that we're looking at.
And then you have some questions from Jorge. I think we have to cut it down to 2 or 3 main questions. Do you think renewable energy and technologies will be properly supported in the new upcoming legislation? Or?
So they should. There are some. So the Commission is pushing a lot on this. But of course, until the legislation comes about, but they are trying to maintain what they have announced in the Green Deal. So I think a lot more is coming, and the Commission is putting forward a lot of exciting things that we need to keep an eye on. However, because sometimes they are put forward as green, but sometimes there's also greenwashing in there as well. So we need to keep an eye on that. For example, we need to keep an eye on sustainable finance. For example, the list that the Commission is working on. We need to make sure that those are really, really green investments and not greenwashing. I don't know if that answers the question. But I think that things are moving forward, and the thing we need to do most is the courage to ban fossil fuel subsidies. I think that will give a boost to the renewables and yeah, help in the long run as well.
And maybe as a last question to summarize some of the comments you got, what is your opinion on the balance between renewable energy and biochar? You mentioned it briefly. Do you think there will be a competition by legislation to?
So for now, I think that with biochar, what we need to do is more working on waste rather than virgin material, because that also gives some issues as well in the societal things that I mentioned earlier. For example, unsustainable harvest, and it gives rise to food versus food and feed versus energy. So I think that I think we are focusing in our project with waste materials, and I think that is also an interesting path to take, rather than really focusing on virgin materials for the production of for the production of biochar. But indeed, if we want to stimulate as well, then we need to also foresee that at the moment, this is also part of my research, so I cannot answer if as it currently is, there's biochar is not, I don't think is included in the renewables because it's basically, it defines sustainable, the sustainable manner of getting this sustainable harvest, basically. So, and then, we need to make sure that the subsidies, they are not skewed and they're not pending toward one or another, and everything that has equal potential should be equally supported. But again, it's a work in progress, so it's I don't have a lot of answers, I'm afraid, but yeah.
No, thank you very much. So there are a couple of